Jack, a 27-year-old, worked as a caretaker at a sanatorium in the United States. For him, that job was more than just a way to pay for college, it was a step toward his dream of becoming a psychologist. His main task was to clean the elderly wards, a simple job that he performed with dedication. However, as days went by, Jack noticed that his responsibilities extended beyond those described in his contract. Often, senior staff members, either overloaded or simply accustomed to delegating tasks, asked him to administer medication and, in some cases, even care for the patients. For many, this might have been seen as exploitation or a deviation from his duties, but Jack saw it differently. He accepted these tasks with enthusiasm because they gave him the opportunity to be closer to the patients and learn directly about the complexities of the human mind. The interaction with the elderly was something that truly fascinated him. Each patient carried a lifetime of stories, emotions, and experiences, and Jack, always curious and attentive, saw these stories as an invaluable source of learning. He enjoyed hearing how these men and women, now mostly fragile and silent, had lived their lives. There was something profoundly human and moving in their narratives. Something that books and theoretical classes could not teach. At first, Jack limited himself to listening, absorbing every detail like a sponge. Over time, he began to ask questions, not only about the facts of the stories but also about the feelings and motivations behind them. He wanted to understand what had led them there, not only in a physical sense but also emotionally and psychologically. Some stories were sad, like Mr. Thompson's, who had lost his wife to cancer and never overcame the pain, spending the last years of his life in loneliness and depression. Others were full of regrets, like Mrs. Davis's, who had always dreamed of traveling the world but never had the courage to leave the city where she was born. But there were also stories of overcoming and resilience, like Mr. Garcia's, an immigrant who, after decades of hard work, managed to build a better life for his family. Even now, weakened by age, he still took pride in his achievements and enjoyed sharing his life lessons with Jack. These moments made Jack feel connected to something larger than himself. He didn't see the patients merely as cases or studies, but as individuals who had lived complex lives, with triumphs and tragedies, joys and sorrows. This connection was one of the things that motivated him most to continue with his studies. He knew that as a psychologist, his job would be to listen, understand, and, if possible, help. And these stories, these lives, were giving him a practical and profound understanding of human nature that no book could offer. Moreover, Jack began to notice patterns in the stories he heard. He observed that many of the elderly had similar issues, such as loneliness, regret, and emotional isolation. These observations started to shape his vision of what he wanted to achieve as a psychologist. He didn't want to be just a professional who prescribed treatments or made diagnoses. He wanted to be someone who helped people find meaning and purpose, even in the darkest moments of their lives. Over time, Jack developed a special bond with some of the patients. They began to trust him, not just as a caretaker who cleaned their rooms, but as a friend with whom they could talk. He became, for many, the highlight of their day, someone who listened without judgment and offered a warm and supportive presence. This relationship also made Jack more aware of the flaws in the care system. He saw how many elderly people were neglected, treated as numbers on a chart rather than as human beings with emotional and psychological needs. This reinforced his determination to make a difference, to be a psychologist who looked beyond the symptoms and treated people as a whole. As he balanced his work at the sanatorium with his studies at college, Jack realized he was growing not only as a student but as a human being. The lessons he learned from the elderly were shaping his worldview, and he knew that when he finally graduated and started practicing psychology, he would carry with him all the stories, all the lives he had touched and that had touched him. The sanatorium was not just a workplace, it was where he discovered his purpose, where he realized that, in the end, what everyone sought, in one way or another, was to be understood, heard, and, above all, remembered. Jack's work at the sanatorium was simple, and the daily routine rarely brought anything unexpected. Most days followed a predictable pattern, with no significant events to break the monotony. However, one day, Jack began to notice a patient who stood out in a subtle yet striking way. She was around 60 years old, but something in her appearance suggested that she had once been younger than her age indicated. Perhaps it was the faded, but still present, glimmer in her eyes or the softness of her features, which seemed to resist the wear of time. This lady aroused a certain concern among the sanatorium staff, but not because she was aggressive or difficult to handle. In fact, it was her withdrawn and enigmatic behavior that drew attention. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words were only disconnected murmurs, uttered in an almost inaudible tone. It was as if her voice had long been forgotten, leaving only distant echoes of something that once was whole. Jack, who had always been interested in the patient's stories, soon realized that this woman was different from the others. She kept herself apart from the others, as if she preferred solitude. Her gaze, almost always lost, conveyed a deep sadness, a melancholy that seemed rooted in something beyond immediate understanding. Despite her reserved behavior, she showed a silent kindness. When Jack handed her the medication, she never failed to nod in thanks, even if her eyes remained fixed on some distant point. When he entered to clean her room, she would leave without protest, waiting patiently at the door until he finished. Upon returning, she would again thank him with a slight nod, a simple gesture, but one that revealed a politeness and courtesy that seemed out of place in that environment. Over time, Jack began to feel intrigued by this woman. He wondered what could have happened in her life to leave her in such a state, trapped in a world of murmurs and solitude. What had brought her to the sanatorium? What secrets did she hold in her mind, now shrouded in clouds of sadness? These questions began to occupy his thoughts as he went about his daily tasks. Gradually, Jack felt a growing desire to get closer to her, to try to understand her story. He knew that, as a caretaker, his interaction with the patients should be limited, but something pushed him to go beyond. Perhaps it was his interest in psychology, or maybe it was simply the empathy that had always guided him in life. In any case, he decided that he would try, slowly, to gain the trust of this mysterious woman. And, perhaps, help alleviate the pain that seemed to suffocate her. This decision, however, would only be the beginning of a journey that would reveal much more than he could ever imagine, both about the patient and about himself. That cold and rainy afternoon marked the beginning of a significant change in Jack's routine. The lady, who had until then been just a silent and isolated patient, now revealed an urgent need to communicate. Jack, touched by the simplicity and sincerity of her request, decided to help her, even knowing that he was taking a risk. When he brought the notebook and pen, he felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. He knew that by breaking the rules, he might put his job in jeopardy, but something about that woman made him believe that what she had to say was important. The moment the lady wrote, "Thank you," Jack realized the depth of her gratitude. Those few letters, written with a trembling hand, were enough for him to feel that he was doing the right thing. Soon after, she began to write her story, and Jack, sitting beside her, read each word with attention. She revealed that her name was Amelia and that, before being admitted to the sanatorium, she had been a successful businesswoman. She had built her own company from scratch, and her empire was a source of pride. But her life took an unexpected turn when she suffered an emotional breakdown, exacerbated by family pressures and personal problems. Amelia wrote about the betrayal of people she trusted and how, one day, she found herself being admitted to the sanatorium under the pretext of needing care, when, in reality, she felt more like a prisoner than a patient. As Amelia wrote, Jack felt his own mind expanding. It wasn't just the story of an ordinary woman, but a narrative full of pain, struggle, and, above all, injustice. He began to realize that the sanatorium was not a safe place for her, but rather a location where her voice had been silenced. Amelia didn't need psychiatric care, she needed justice and, above all, freedom. Jack promised himself that he would help her escape, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He needed to plan each step carefully. They spent the following weeks discreetly discussing and plotting Amelia's escape. She provided him with details about people who could help, such as her lawyer, who was still loyal to her and not involved in her forced confinement. However, as Jack read Amelia's accounts, he began to feel the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. His empathy for her situation grew every day, as did his determination to help her. He knew he would need to be extremely cautious, as any mistake could not only ruin Amelia's chance of freedom but also destroy his own life. Time passed, and Jack continued to help Amelia write her story, a little more each day. He also began to discreetly search for information about the contacts she mentioned, trying to build a safe path to get her out of the sanatorium. Amelia, in turn, demonstrated a surprising strength, even after everything she had been through. She trusted Jack, and that gave him the courage to move forward, even knowing the odds were against them. Finally, the day of the escape arrived. Amelia and Jack had devised a detailed plan, which involved the collaboration of her lawyer and a trusted old friend, who were ready to receive her as soon as they left the sanatorium. Jack knew there would be no turning back, but he was determined to do what was right. With a racing heart, he helped Amelia out of her room, and together they walked through the corridors of the sanatorium, trying not to draw attention. Each step seemed to echo in their minds, but they pressed on, guided by the hope of a new life for Amelia. Finally, upon reaching the exit, the lawyer was waiting outside with the car running. Amelia turned to Jack, holding his hand for a brief moment. Words weren't necessary, her grateful look said it all. They made it. Jack had achieved the impossible, and Amelia was finally free. As the car drove away, he felt a mix of relief and a strange sense of emptiness. His life would never be the same, but he knew he had done the right thing. Now, all that remained was to hope that, one day, justice would be served and that Amelia could fully resume her life. Jack returned to the sanatorium that same day, ready to face the consequences but with a clear conscience, knowing he had helped a woman regain her freedom and dignity. Amelia Thompson, at 60, was a determined and dedicated woman, whose love for work and for her children, Richard and Emily, was evident in every decision she made. Her mansion, located in an affluent neighborhood in the United States, was an imposing structure that reflected the prosperity she had achieved over the years. Amelia had built a business empire almost single-handedly, and her pride in that accomplishment motivated her to keep working, even as age and health began to take their toll. However, the demands of work began to grow heavier. Amelia frequently felt exhausted, and the dizziness that had been tormenting her started to intensify. But in her mind, there was no time to take care of herself. The business required her constant attention, and she believed her children were not yet ready to take on such responsibilities. Richard, at 25, and Emily, at 22, seemed more concerned with immediate pleasures than with the future. One day, after a long and exhausting day of meetings and difficult decisions, Amelia finally arrived home, wishing only for a moment of rest. But upon opening the door to the living room, she was met with a scene that unsettled her. Emily, her younger daughter, was parading around the room, showcasing a new outfit with a satisfied smile on her face as she admired herself in the mirror. Amelia immediately recognized the cut and fabric of the garment, clearly luxurious. Her gaze then shifted to the sofa, where a pile of shopping bags was scattered haphazardly. The sight made her pause for a moment. It wasn't the first time she had seen Emily in expensive clothes. But that night, the number of bags suggested she had indulged in a significant splurge. Amelia felt a pang in her chest, a mix of concern and frustration. She knew she had provided her children with a comfortable life, but this display of unchecked spending began to set off alarms in her mind. "Emily, where did you buy all this?" Amelia asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the whirlwind of thoughts that were racing through her mind. "Oh, Mom, I went shopping with some friends." "You know how much I love fashion," Emily replied, not noticing the seriousness in her mother's tone. "Isn't it beautiful? I think I finally found my style." Amelia sighed, moving closer to the sofa and picking up one of the bags. She examined the tag, and seeing the price, a deeper concern overwhelmed her. "Emily, do you know how much this cost? We're at a point where we need to be more responsible with our spending." Emily rolled her eyes as if her mother's concern was exaggerated. "Mom, you work so hard, we have enough money, don't we? And besides, I didn't buy anything I couldn't pay for with the card you gave me." These words hit Amelia like a blow. She had given her children everything she could to provide them with a comfortable life, but now she saw that her generosity might be undermining their sense of responsibility. Amelia realized that she had created a gap between what she considered prudent and what her children saw as normal. However, what worried her most was the fact that while her children enjoyed the fruits of her labor, her health was deteriorating day by day. The dizziness that had once been sporadic was becoming more frequent, and she could not ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. But her love for her children and her desire to protect them from the harsh realities of the world made her continue postponing a visit to the doctor. Feeling exhausted and too weak to argue, Amelia picked up a few bags and set them aside before heading to her room. "Emily, we need to talk about this later. I just need to rest now." She withdrew, leaving Emily alone in the living room, still absorbed in her own world. Amelia, on the other hand, lay down on the bed but couldn't sleep. Her mind was restless, reflecting on her children's future and the legacy she was building. Each passing day, she felt a greater urgency to prepare Richard and Emily for life, but she also knew that, before anything else, she needed to take care of herself to continue being the mother and leader she had always been. But that night, as the rain battered against the windows of the grand mansion, Amelia made a decision. She knew that something needed to change, both regarding her health and the way she was raising her children. It was time to confront the realities she had been avoiding and, above all, protect what truly mattered, her family and the legacy she had fought so hard to build. "Emily, why did you buy so many clothes? There's more clothing here than fits in your wardrobe," Amelia said, trying to hide the growing frustration in her voice. Emily, seemingly indifferent to her mother's concern, replied casually, "I needed to update my wardrobe." "Mom." Amelia looked at her daughter, searching for some understanding in the vague explanation Emily offered. "Update your wardrobe," she repeated, more to herself than to Emily. "You already have so many clothes, and many of them have barely been used." Emily shrugged as if the issue was irrelevant. "I got rid of all the old clothes I had and threw them away. They were out of fashion." Emily's statement hit Amelia like a shock. Without saying anything more, she quickly moved outside, her heart racing. Upon opening the door to the exterior, she was met with a sight that left her incredulous. The trash bin was overflowing with clothes, so many that some had fallen to the ground due to lack of space. Shirts, dresses, pants, items she knew Emily had barely worn, were carelessly piled, mixed with garbage. The cold wind blowing that autumn afternoon lightly stirred the discarded clothes, as if mocking the situation. Anger began to overtake Amelia. She approached the trash bin, picking up one of the shirts that had fallen on the ground. It was a high-quality piece, bought not long ago, still looking new. Amelia felt a lump in her throat, a mix of indignation and sadness. She couldn't understand how her daughter could be so careless, so unaware of the value of things. Emily, who had followed her mother outside, stood by the door, observing her with a confused look. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I didn't want those clothes anymore, so I threw them out." "I don't see why you're so upset." Amelia turned to Emily, trying to control the anger that threatened to explode. "Emily, you threw away clothes that could have been donated. There are people who need them, people who don't have anything to wear, and you just threw it all away as if it had no value." Emily gave another of her indifferent shrugs. "Donate? I didn't even think of that. I just wanted to get rid of what I wasn't going to use anymore." The lack of empathy in Emily's response left Amelia even more shaken. She had always tried to teach her children the value of sharing and helping others, but in that moment, she realized she might have failed in imparting that lesson to Emily. The act of throwing away almost new clothes, without even considering the possibility of donation, seemed to symbolize something deeper, a disconnect from reality, a lack of understanding of the privilege in which they lived. Amelia sighed, feeling suddenly exhausted. The weight of responsibilities, expectations, and now disappointment seemed to crush her. "Emily," she began, her voice softer but firm, "the money I earn is not meant to be wasted like this. And more than that, what you do has an impact, even if you don't realize it. We can't live in a bubble, ignoring what happens around us." Emily, seeing the seriousness in her mother's eyes, began to understand the gravity of the situation. "I didn't think of that, Mom," she admitted, seeming a bit embarrassed. "I just wanted new things and got rid of the old ones. I'm sorry." Amelia put her hand on Emily's shoulder, softening her expression slightly. "I know, dear. But we need to be more mindful of our choices. Next time, think about how what you don't want anymore could be useful to someone else. And remember, the value of things isn't just in how much they cost, but in what they can mean to other people." Emily nodded, still processing her mother's words. Amelia, for her part, knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but she hoped this conversation was a step in the right direction. As she went back inside, she decided it was time to dedicate more effort to teaching her children about the importance of empathy and responsibility, not just financial, but also social. She knew that as a mother, this was one of the most valuable lessons she could leave as a legacy. Amelia tried to discuss the situation with Emily and the need for responsibility, but the conversation soon turned into a deadlock. She struggled to make Emily understand the gravity of waste and the importance of considering others' needs. However, Amelia's words seemed to have no effect. Emily, with A disdainful look simply turned to her room, ignoring her mother's request to discuss the future. With a pounding headache, Amelia decided to sit on the sofa, trying to calm herself and regain her composure. However, before she could relax, the phone rang. It was Richard, her son, and the urgency in his voice made Amelia's heart race. "Mom, I'm at the police station," he said, his tone filled with desperation. "If you don't come help me, I'm going to be arrested." A shiver ran down Amelia's spine. She quickly got up and headed to the police station, her mind racing with worry about what she might find. When she arrived, she was greeted by a distressing scene. Richard was handcuffed, visibly drunk, with a look of regret and desperation. The officers, with serious expressions, explained that Richard had been caught driving under the influence and had hit a cyclist. Fortunately, the cyclist, despite the scare, only suffered minor scratches and was in stable condition. Amelia felt a wave of disappointment and disgust. Richard's reckless behavior was something she hadn't anticipated, and seeing him in that situation deeply affected her. She couldn't find the words to comfort or even scold him at that moment. The pain and frustration were so intense that she chose to remain silent, focusing on resolving the situation as practically as possible. She paid Richard's bail, a considerable amount, to have him released. Additionally, Amelia did her best to compensate the cyclist for the damages caused. She paid a substantial settlement, trying to mitigate the impact of the accident, even knowing that it wouldn't erase Richard's mistake. Leaving the police station, Amelia sat in her car, completely exhausted and emotionally drained. The combination of frustrations with Emily and the crisis with Richard had taken a heavy toll on her. She drove back home, the weight of responsibility and concern hanging over her shoulders. Upon arriving, she looked at the house with a sense of resignation, aware that she needed to face the issues with her children and find a way to guide them to a deeper understanding of the consequences of their actions and the responsibilities that came with the life they led. Crying silently, Amelia drove back home, with Richard passed out in the back seat. Every turn in the road seemed to weigh even more on her shoulders, and the headache she felt was almost unbearable. Upon arrival, she parked the car and, with an effort, removed Richard from the back seat, leaving him there, while she went straight to her room. The room was silent, but to Amelia, the silence seemed deafening. She sat on the edge of the bed, the headache pulsing in her temples and her mind full of confusing and distressing thoughts. She wondered where she had gone wrong in raising her children. She tried to relive the important moments of their lives, the efforts she made to provide the best education and opportunities possible, and yet she felt that something was terribly wrong. Richard's irresponsible choices and Emily's lack of maturity seemed to reflect a significant failure, and Amelia was devastated by the idea of not having prepared them adequately for adulthood. With a firm resolution, Amelia decided that drastic changes were necessary. The next day, she called a meeting with Richard and Emily. She was determined to set boundaries and teach them the responsibility that, in her view, they had clearly ignored. "Richard, Emily," Amelia began with a voice laden with firmness and pain, "from now on, you need to understand that your actions have consequences." She looked at each of them, her gaze stern but full of concern. "You will be leaving home. There is no more room for you here without showing that you're ready to face life in a mature way." Emily tried to protest, but Amelia raised her hand, asking for silence. "You will start working at the family business and need to enroll in college. It's time for you to take on responsibilities and start building your future seriously." Richard, who already worked at the company, received an even harsher reprimand. "You will have to cover all the damages you caused, including the damage to the car, which will no longer be yours. We need to be clear, the consequences of your actions must be faced. There will be no more credit cards. And you will have to find a way to live on what you earn on your own. The conversation was tough, and the silence that followed was filled with tension. Richard and Emily, shocked and desolate, were in an initial state of denial. The reality of what was being imposed on them was hard to accept, and frustration was visible on their faces. Amelia, although emotionally drained, felt she had made the right decision. She knew it was necessary for her children to learn the importance of responsibility and the consequences of their actions. With tears in her eyes but renewed determination, she left her children to adjust to the new conditions imposed. The change would not be easy, but she believed that by facing their own difficulties, Richard and Emily could finally mature and understand the value of the lessons life was trying to teach them. Richard and Emily were visibly upset by their mother's decision. They tried to argue, raising their voices and protesting against what they considered to be an injustice. "You can't do this to us. It's cruel," Emily exclaimed, while Richard shook his head in disbelief. Both were furious and felt betrayed, as if Amelia was turning her back on them in their time of need. Amelia, however, remained firm. She knew she needed to set boundaries for her children to understand the seriousness of the situation. "I've given you everything you could want, but now it's time for you to learn to take responsibility for your actions," she said in a resolute voice. "You have 2 weeks to find a place to live and resolve the situation." Desperate and unsure how to react, Richard and Emily rushed to the bank to try to withdraw as much money as they could. However, when they got there, they discovered it was too late. The credit cards had been cancelled, and their access to any financial resources had been revoked. They were out of funds and options. Feeling powerless and helpless, the two returned home, where the tension and desperation manifested in a series of arguments and accusations. Amelia, for her part, was deeply saddened and distressed. The decision to kick her children out of the house was one of the hardest she had ever had to make, and the emotional pain was almost unbearable. She spent hours in tears, mourning the fact that her attempt to correct her children's path had led her to a state of despair. The next day, as she returned from work, Amelia's headache intensified. The pressure she felt seemed to grow with each passing minute, becoming almost incapacitating. As soon as she entered the house, she went straight to the sofa, hoping to find some relief from the growing discomfort. She sat down, but the pain was so intense that she could barely concentrate. Trying to call one of her children for help, she picked up the phone with trembling hands. However, the pain became unbearable, and before she could complete the call, Amelia passed out. Her body collapsed, and she fell onto the sofa, completely unconscious. When she awoke, she had no idea how much time had passed, but the feeling of weakness and confusion was palpable. The environment around her seemed strange and distant, and the worry that her children were not there to help her only increased her distress. Amelia was in a state of vulnerability, struggling to understand what was happening to her, and despite her weakened state, a part of her mind still worried about Richard and Emily's future. She wanted them to learn and grow, but at the same time, the reality of her own condition hit her with overwhelming force. When Amelia woke up, she was disoriented and confused. The first thing she noticed was that it was still daytime, but looking at her phone screen, she was shocked to realize that an entire day had passed since her collapse. She had been lying inert on the sofa for 24 hours, with none of her children having done anything to help her. The sight of the phone, with the date and time, filled her with despair and anguish. The feeling of abandonment by Richard and Emily was deep and painful. Amelia tried to move, but her body felt heavy and uncoordinated. Every movement was a tremendous effort, and speech eluded her. She managed, with great effort, to send a text message to her children, asking for help. Their response was slow in coming, and when they finally came to check on her, they showed a mix of guilt and concern. Richard and Emily, upon seeing their mother's weakened state, quickly took her to the hospital. In the emergency room, Amelia was examined urgently. The doctor, after a series of tests, confirmed that intense and prolonged stress had caused damage to Amelia's brain. The effects were evident. She couldn't move one of her legs normally, and her speech was severely affected. Her words came out in a halting and incoherent manner, a clear result of extreme stress and the lack of immediate medical attention. The doctor explained that, although Amelia's condition was concerning, there was hope. With appropriate treatment and ongoing rehabilitation, it was possible that she could regain some of her motor functions and eventually speak clearly again. The road would be long and full of challenges, but the prospect of improvement was a relief amid the anguish she felt. Despite the pain and frustration, Amelia tried to hold on to that hope. She knew that recovery would not be easy and that she would face a long process of therapy and adaptation. Her children, now confronted with the gravity of the situation, were willing to help, though regret and guilt were evident in their expressions. As she began to adjust to the new reality, Amelia reflected on the choices she had made and the challenges she would face. The concern for her physical recovery was great, but the feeling of betrayal and the fear of not being able to regain her speech and mobility haunted her. However, the determination to overcome these adversities and the support of her children were the pillars on which she based her hope for the future. Amelia spent hours crying. The weight of her emotions seemed unbearable. Although she was still able to walk, the difficulty with her speech was a constant burden, and the worry that it might be permanent tormented her. Every attempt to speak was a painful reminder of how her life had changed in the blink of an eye. Her children, Richard and Emily, felt the gravity of the situation and, unexpectedly, took over the management of their mother's business. This gesture, though late, brought some relief to Amelia. Over the months, Amelia began to see signs of improvement. The mobility in her leg gradually returned, giving her hope that recovery for her speech might also be possible. However, the words still came out haltingly and disordered. She struggled to express herself clearly, and every conversation was a reminder of the constant battle she faced. One day, Richard and Emily called her for a serious talk. Both had worried expressions, and Amelia realized that this conversation was different from the previous ones. They suggested that Amelia take some time for herself, away from the pressure of work and family responsibilities. They argued that she had devoted so much to work and family, and that now it was time for her to take care of herself. Amelia, touched by her children's genuine concern, felt a wave of emotion. The idea of a break, something she hadn't considered before, seemed like a balm for her weary spirit. Although she wasn't entirely convinced that a trip would solve all her problems, the prospect of some time for herself was tempting. Their suggestion seemed like a sign that, despite the challenges, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. After a brief discussion, she accepted the proposal with a mix of hope and apprehension. The idea of leaving her home, her business, and the routine that kept her busy for a while was a significant step. The trip would be an opportunity to disconnect from stress and focus on her recovery, both physical and emotional. As she prepared for the trip, Amelia experienced a new sense of relief. She had spent so much time taking care of everyone around her, and was now about to do something for herself. This small change in perspective offered her renewed hope. In her mind, the trip became not just a necessary break but a symbol of a new beginning. She was determined to make the most of this time away from everything. And, perhaps, find some comfort and renewal amid this new phase of her life. Amelia's children dedicated themselves to planning a special trip for her, with an attention to detail that seemed to indicate a sincere effort to provide a moment of relief and renewal. The trip was organized to last 2 weeks and included a series of sightseeing tours, promising an experience full of discoveries and relaxation. Amelia, relieved by the change of environment and touched by her children's concern, was excited and felt a renewed optimism. During the flight, Amelia felt lighter. The clouds seemed brighter, and the sky, vaster. There was something comforting in knowing that her children were showing a more attentive and responsible side, which made her believe that, despite everything, there was still hope for the family. Upon landing at the airport, Amelia collected her luggage and found a car waiting for her, as promised by her children. The driver, friendly and helpful, assisted in placing the bags in the trunk and then drove her along a route that seemed promising. The roads were surrounded by stunning landscapes, and Amelia allowed herself to relax and absorb the beauty of the scenery along the way. As the car moved further away from the city, Amelia noticed that the area around seemed increasingly deserted. The environment began to change gradually, with urban landscapes giving way to rural and solitary areas. Although a bit surprised by the distance from the hotel to the city center, Amelia trusted her children's planning and believed that the tranquility of the location could be an intentional part of the experience. Finally, the car stopped in front of the building that would be her accommodation. Amelia, expecting to see a hotel sign, was stunned to read the word Sanatorium on the building's facade. A feeling of discomfort and confusion enveloped her instantly. What was supposed to be a relaxing and sightseeing getaway now seemed to have taken an unexpected and unsettling turn. The building did not look like a conventional hotel. Its structure and the surrounding atmosphere resembled more of a medical facility that Amelia was familiar with. She tried to convince herself that she was just being paranoid and that there could be a logical explanation for the situation. However, the idea of being in a sanatorium, especially after the recent stress and issues, was not something she had expected. With her heart racing, Amelia approached the building's entrance, her mind racing with questions and concerns. The promised tranquility now seemed threatened by a new and disturbing reality. What had initially seemed like a trip for recovery and rest was now turning into a mystery that needed to be unraveled. Amelia knew she needed to understand what was really happening, and with that determination, she prepared to face the unknown that awaited her. Amelia, scared and confused, tried to make sense of the absurd situation she was in. Her request for the driver to take her to the hotel was ignored, and from that moment, her reality changed drastically. 3 men, who appeared to be staff of the sanatorium, approached and restrained her with unexpected force. At first, Amelia tried to resist, believing it could be a cruel prank or a miscommunication. However, her resistance was in vain, and the men's force, coupled with the driver's confirmation that she was a new patient, forced her into the building. A sense of hopelessness and frustration overwhelmed Amelia as the sanatorium doors closed behind her. The attempt to escape seemed increasingly impossible, and the weight of the situation felt crushing. From that moment on, she found herself confined in an environment she did not understand, with no visible chance of freedom. Meanwhile, in Amelia's room, Jack was perplexed as he read her story. The narrative was distressing and hard to believe, but he couldn't ignore her request. Doubt settled in his mind. Was Amelia really telling the truth, or was she just trying to invent a story to escape the situation? The phone number written by Amelia seemed to be his only hope of verifying the story's authenticity. Jack took the paper with the number and, before leaving the room, looked at Amelia with a determined expression. "I'm going to call this number and check what's going on. If you're telling the truth, I'll do whatever I can to help you," he promised with conviction. Jack knew he needed to act cautiously. It was crucial to confirm the legitimacy of the story before taking any actions that could compromise his job and his own safety. The decision to help Amelia was important to him, but he didn't want to risk making a hasty move without having all the necessary information. He left the room and went to a more private area where he could make the call in privacy. As he dialed the number, Jack felt a mix of anxiety and hope. If Amelia's story was true, he needed to find out the truth and find a way to free her from that place. The call was answered after a few rings, and Jack quickly explained the situation. On the other end of the line, a calm and authoritative voice began to clarify the details. As the conversation progressed, Jack realized the gravity of the situation and the implications involved. The information he received would help him form a plan to rescue Amelia, but he knew he had to act quickly and precisely to ensure nothing went wrong. With a growing sense of urgency, Jack prepared to face the challenges ahead and do everything he could to help Amelia regain the freedom and justice she deserved. With tears in her eyes, Amelia smiled when she saw Jack return to the sanatorium, bringing with him the hope that her situation could be resolved. The next day, Jack made the promised call, contacting the number Amelia had given him. He detailed the situation to the man who answered the phone, his voice filled with urgency and determination. The man, clearly well-informed and resolute, listened attentively and promised to take the necessary steps to investigate the case. When Jack returned to work, he found the sanatorium in a state of great agitation. The environment, which had previously been calm and controlled, was now filled with police officers moving with clear purpose. Jack's heart raced as he saw Amelia at the center of the scene, accompanied by a man dressed in an elegant black suit. The man, who clearly drew attention with his demeanor and the seriousness with which he handled the situation, introduced himself as a longtime friend of Amelia and also her personal lawyer. Amelia approached Jack with a genuine smile and an emotional hug, a gesture overflowing with gratitude and relief. The lawyer, in turn, shook Jack's hand firmly, as a sign of respect and thanks for his help. Through the lawyer, Jack learned that Amelia's story was true. He revealed that Amelia's children, Richard and Emily, had orchestrated a detailed plan to imprison their mother in the sanatorium. The children had bribed the sanatorium's director, who accepted the bribe to keep Amelia captive under false pretenses of her having retired and being on an extended trip. This conspiracy involved not only deception and manipulation but also a complete disregard for the truth and Amelia's rights. The revelation shocked Jack and highlighted the severity of the abuse of power and betrayal that Amelia had suffered. The lawyer explained that the children's scheme had been meticulously planned to ensure Amelia was kept away from the public and the management of her own assets, while they took full control of her properties and finances. With this confirmation, the situation became clear, and necessary actions were immediately set in motion. The police began detailed investigations, and Amelia's lawyer took legal steps to prosecute both the children and the sanatorium's director for their crimes. Jack, relieved to see that Amelia was finally being helped and that the truth was coming to light, prepared to support her in her journey toward recovery and justice. Amelia's battle was not yet completely won, but Jack's support and the legal intervention offered a renewed hope that justice would be served and that she would finally have the chance to reverse the damage that had been done to her. Despite having regained her freedom, Amelia was still most defined by her maternal love. Although she was freed from the sanatorium, she chose not to report her children and asked her lawyer to keep Richard and Emily's involvement in the scheme against her confidential. Her decision was driven by unconditional love and the hope that, despite their actions, they might find a more constructive path in the future. However, sadness still marked her gaze. The experience left her with a deep emotional weight that she carried silently. For years passed quickly, and Richard and Emily's lives had changed drastically. The mansion, where they had lived with their mother for most of their lives, was now in the process of being vacated. The comfortable and carefree life they had known had completely crumbled. After sending Amelia to the sanatorium, Richard and Emily took over the management of her businesses. However, the lack of aptitude and interest from the siblings led to a total collapse of the businesses. In 4 years, everything Amelia had built over a lifetime was lost. Now, facing the reality of having lost everything they owned, the siblings were in a disastrous financial situation. The house, the cars, and all their bank accounts were empty. The irony of the situation was not lost on them, but curiously, there did not seem to be a significant expression of sadness on their faces. There was a certain coldness in the way they dealt with the loss, as if the magnitude of what they had faced was not fully understood or accepted. The day before, a lawyer friend of Amelia had made an unexpected visit. The news he brought was devastating. Their mother had passed away. However, the sadness of the news was overshadowed by the surprise and disillusionment that followed. The lawyer informed them that, despite Amelia's death, it was unlikely that Richard and Emily would have any claim to her inheritance. The reason was clear: their actions had not only destroyed Amelia's legacy but had also tainted any possible claim to what she had left behind. As the lawyer explained the situation, Richard and Emily were stunned. The news of their mother's death was not as impactful as the fact that they were excluded from any benefit that might have been left for them. The revelation forced them to confront the harsh reality that, in addition to losing their privileged and comfortable position, they were now also deprived of any remnants of what had once been their mother's estate. In this scenario, Richard and Emily's reaction was mixed. There was a strange blend of resignation and frustration. They no longer had the financial security they once enjoyed and now had to face the prospect of rebuilding their lives from scratch. The irony and justice seemed to intertwine in the siblings' lives as they tried to process the reality of their choices and their consequences. Life went on, and the future was uncertain, but the lesson Amelia had left, even if indirectly, was clear. The cost of betrayal and irresponsibility was high, and Richard and Emily now had the difficult task of facing the consequences of their actions and finding a new way to move forward. Emily and Richard were stunned. The idea of having no claim to Amelia's inheritance seemed impossible to accept. Their minds raced trying to comprehend how the situation could be so unjust. The lawyer, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the confusion on their faces, decided to explain the reason in more detail. He revealed a devastating secret: Richard and Emily were not Amelia's biological children. In fact, the birth records they had were falsified. This revelation left them in shock, unable to process the magnitude of the lie that had been built around their lives. To help them better understand the complexity of the situation, the lawyer began to tell the real story of Amelia. Amelia Thompson was born in the United States to immigrants facing severe financial difficulties. Her family's life was marked by constant challenges, and the loss of her father worsened the situation. Amelia's mother, without support and with limited resources, struggled to provide the bare necessities for her daughter. However, Amelia's life began to change when her mother met a young man who was in a more comfortable financial situation. This new relationship gave Amelia the opportunity to study at good schools and access a better life, something that had been nearly impossible for her until then. The stepfather, with his support, helped open doors for Amelia, allowing her to develop her potential and acquire a quality education. Years later, when her mother and stepfather passed away, Amelia was already established and began building her own empire. Her determination and intelligence led her to become one of the most influential and wealthy women in the city. She created a significant legacy but, over the years, decided to adopt children to fill the void she felt in her life, though she faced immense challenges to ensure these children had a better life. The lawyer explained that, upon discovering the truth about her adopted children's identity, Amelia chose not to reveal it, trying to protect the well-being of the children she had loved and raised as her own. Amelia's decision to leave part of her fortune to the adopted children was, in fact, a way to give them a chance, but with one condition: to learn to take responsibility and value what was truly important. Upon hearing the story, Richard and Emily were completely disoriented. The weight of the revelation was overwhelming, and they now faced the reality that the life they had known was founded on a great lie. The loss of the inheritance, the truth about their origins, and the way they had treated Amelia were all intertwined in a web of regret and disillusionment. Desolate and unsure of how to react, the two needed to confront the harsh truth and find a way to restart their lives, now understanding the true legacy Amelia had tried to leave them. The revelation not only destroyed their future expectations but also challenged their concepts of identity, family, and responsibility. Life, as they knew it, had changed forever. Despite her impressive success and the empire she had built, Amelia Thompson felt a deep void. The achievement of her professional dreams did not fill the longing she had for a family of her own. After a series of medical exams, Amelia received the devastating news that she had a severe uterine condition that would prevent her from becoming pregnant. This diagnosis deeply shook her but also led her to consider other ways to fulfill her desire to be a mother. Determined to fill the void in her heart, Amelia considered adoption. The search for a child to adopt was a long and challenging process, but she was resolute. It was then that a close friend approached her with an urgent request. The friend knew of a couple who had attempted to cross the U.S. border with 2 children, but unfortunately, the couple did not survive the dangerous journey and died. The children, now alone and hidden from the authorities, were at imminent risk of being returned to their country of origin, where they would face the harsh reality of inadequate orphanages and poor conditions. The story deeply moved Amelia. The fate of the children and the possibility of giving them a better chance at life was a cause she could not ignore. With a heart full of compassion and a firm decision to offer a safe and loving home, Amelia decided to adopt the 2 children, Richard and Emily. To ensure the adoption, she and her friend created falsified documents that secured the integration of the children into her life. Richard and Emily, when informed of the truth about their adoption, were deeply shocked. The revelation that they were adopted and that their identities had been based on falsified documents was a devastating blow. However, what affected them most was discovering the extent of the fortune Amelia still possessed. The lawyer, noticing the sadness and confusion on their faces, revealed that Amelia had left a will that included an inheritance for them. The lawyer explained that to access what Amelia had left for them, Richard and Emily would need to go to the place where Amelia was buried to begin the necessary legal process. The news brought a mix of emotions. Although the prospect of an inheritance was a relief amidst the emotional devastation, the fact that they would need to confront Amelia's final resting place to start the process was a task they could not ignore. The two, still processing the depth of the situation, knew they needed to move forward. The prospect of facing the reality of Amelia's will and dealing with the truth about their adoption required not only courage but also an acknowledgement of the responsibilities they were about to undertake. The journey to understand and accept the true story of their lives was just beginning, and they would need to find a way to honor Amelia's memory and deal with the legacy she had left. The next day, Richard and Emily boarded the flight with contagious euphoria. The excitement was palpable as the two made extravagant plans about how they would spend the inheritance they hoped to receive. Emily, with eyes shining with enthusiasm, already imagined buying a huge house, where she planned to dedicate an entire room just to store her new clothes. She dreamed of filling the space with the most luxurious garments and finally having a closet worthy of her aspirations. Richard, on the other hand, was equally excited, but his focus was on living life to the fullest. He planned endless parties, travels, and a carefree lifestyle, hoping never to have to work again. When the flight landed, the lawyer met them at the airport and guided them to the place where Amelia had been buried. During the drive to the cemetery, Richard and Emily eagerly discussed their future plans, unaware of what awaited them. Arriving at the cemetery, they were led to Amelia's grave, where they encountered a young man named Jack. He was standing beside the gravestone, his expression serene and somewhat weary, as if the pain of the loss was still fresh. Jack introduced himself as a friend of Amelia, someone who had been by her side in her final moments, and offered a respectful handshake. The lawyer, noting the tension and mixed emotions Richard and Emily were experiencing, explained that Jack had been a constant and supportive presence for Amelia, especially during her time in the sanatorium and after her return to the city. Jack, with a look of understanding, began to talk to the siblings about Amelia's legacy, detailing her generosity and how she had planned to distribute her fortune. As they talked, Jack revealed additional details about Amelia's life, emphasizing not only her financial success but also the love and compassion she had for those around her. He highlighted how Amelia had struggled to overcome her own adversities and how she had sought, until the last moment, to help others and do good. The revelation about Amelia's will and the conditions for the inheritance began to unfold before Richard and Emily's eyes. They listened attentively as Jack and the lawyer explained Amelia's final provisions. The inheritance, as they would soon realize, was not just a matter of monetary value but also carried a deep message about responsibility and the legacy Amelia wanted to leave for her adopted children. The atmosphere around them was solemn, and Jack's presence offered a new perspective on who Amelia had truly been. Richard and Emily, now confronted with the reality of the will and the impact of their past actions, began to reflect on what it really meant to receive the inheritance left by Amelia. The visit to Amelia's grave not only marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives but also forced them to face the choices they would make next and the true legacy she hoped they would honor. The lawyer opened the will and, with a solemn voice, began to read the words written by Amelia. Richard and Emily, with their hearts racing, listened attentively. 98% of my entire fortune must be donated to charitable institutions that I have supported throughout my life. The remaining 2% I leave to my two adopted children, Richard and Emily, on the condition that they return to their country of origin. This amount will be given as a minimum monthly salary until the money runs out. If they choose not to move, the amount will be fully donated to charitable institutions. The siblings were stunned. Richard furrowed his brow, trying to process the words he had just heard. Emily, initially in shock, began to feel frustration grow as the implications of the will became clear. The promised inheritance, which they had hoped would be a large sum of money, was now revealed to be a much smaller amount, distributed over time and with a condition they had not anticipated. Richard, with a choked voice, asked, "But what about the fortune she had? Is there nothing else for us?" The lawyer looked at them with a mix of empathy and seriousness. Amelia was very clear in her will. She wanted to ensure that the majority of her money was used to help those in need, as she always did. The remaining 2% is intended for you, but only if you accept the condition of returning to your country of origin. If you do not accept, this amount will also be donated to charitable institutions. Emily tried to rationalize the situation. But why would she do this? Aren't we still her children, even if adopted? Don't we deserve more than this? Jack, who had been listening silently, intervened with a calm and thoughtful voice. Amelia made the choice she believed was the most fair and meaningful. She wanted you to see the value of opportunities and the importance of starting anew, not just in financial terms but also in terms of values and contributions to society. The revelation caused a heavy silence among those present. Richard and Emily were struggling with the reality of their new circumstances. They had expected a significant inheritance that could provide them with a luxurious, worry-free lifestyle, but Amelia's will had imposed an unexpected lesson. The lawyer continued, explaining that the money reserved for them, should they choose to return to their country of origin, would be distributed monthly as a way to help them restart their lives. However, if they chose not to follow the condition, the amount would be fully donated to the causes Amelia supported, as she had stipulated. Richard and Emily faced a crucial decision. They could either choose to return to their country of origin and start a new life with the modest amount they would receive, or stay where they were and see the entire inheritance donated to charitable institutions. As the decision weighed on them, Jack offered additional support, volunteering to provide advice on what could be done next. He knew that the situation was complex and filled with conflicting emotions. The visit to Amelia's grave and the reading of the will had turned what seemed like an opportunity for wealth into a challenge of character and life choices. As the sun began to set, Richard and Emily found themselves in a moment of deep reflection. The inheritance promised by Amelia, now laden with meaning and conditions, forced them to confront their own expectations and decide what kind of future they truly wanted to build. The siblings were visibly shaken, sitting in the lawyer's office as they processed the content of Amelia's will. The weight of the decision was upon them, and anger mixed with a feeling of helplessness. Richard tried to stay calm, but his frustration was evident on his face, while Emily cried silently, tears streaming down her face. Richard, his voice choked with frustration, tried to understand the situation. "We can't stay here with no money and no prospects. How are we going to survive?" He pounded his fist on the table, his anger clear in his gestures. Emily, her eyes red and swollen from crying, looked at the lawyer. "Is there nothing we can do? Can't we contest this somehow?" Her voice was laden with desperation. The lawyer, with a sympathetic expression, tried to calm them. Amelia was very clear in her will. "If you do not accept the condition, the entire inheritance will be donated to charitable institutions. I understand that the situation is difficult, but there is not much that can be done about it." Desperate and with few options, Richard and Emily agreed to sign the necessary documents, accepting the inheritance with the condition of moving back to their country of origin and facing a life of hardship was the only alternative left. The day of departure came, and with heavy hearts and bags filled with few possessions, they left the United States. The flight was silent and laden with a sense of defeat. Richard and Emily sat side by side, looking out the window without saying a word. The life they had known was disintegrating, and the future seemed bleak. Upon arriving at their destination, they were met with the harsh, relentless reality of their new environment. The country of origin was a place where the cost of living was low, but job opportunities were scarce and living conditions were poor. The little money they received from Amelia was not enough to guarantee a comfortable life. They were forced to seek humble jobs and often had to deal with the difficulties and frustrations of everyday life. The experience of returning to a poorer environment and struggling to survive was a shock for Richard and Emily. They were confronted with the harsh reality of their choices and the need to adapt to a life they had never imagined for themselves. Emily, who initially struggled to recover from mourning for a better life, began to realize that hard work and resilience were necessary for survival. She took on various jobs, from store clerk to factory work, and started to adapt to the new reality. The experience, though painful, gradually taught her to be more independent and appreciate the value of effort. Richard, on the other hand, had difficulty adjusting and finding stable employment. His anger and frustration with the situation made him difficult to deal with, and he had to face the challenge of maintaining calm and determination to overcome the obstacles that arose. He began to seek training and education opportunities to improve his qualifications, but progress was slow and filled with setbacks. Both learned from the experience in a painful way, but the journey forced them to face the reality of their actions and seek a new purpose. The life they had hoped for, transforming into a reality of luxury and ease, had become a lesson in humility and perseverance. The following years were marked by challenges and personal growth. Richard and Emily, although still struggling to find balance in their lives, began to recognize the importance of the lessons they had learned and worked to build a new life, far from the opulence they once desired but now with a new perspective on the value of integrity and hard work. After Richard and Emily left, Jack and the lawyer were left alone. The atmosphere was one of tension and relief at the same time. Jack was perplexed by the situation, while the lawyer seemed relieved to finally be able to reveal the truth about Amelia. It was then that Amelia appeared. She was visibly shaken but had a faint smile of satisfaction. The tears in her eyes were not only of sadness but also of relief at finally being free from her children and the sanatorium that had unjustly imprisoned her. Amelia hugged Jack and the lawyer with gratitude. She had not revealed her identity to the world to protect her privacy and continue her life without further trauma. Amelia's decision not to return to her hometown was marked by the need to close a painful chapter of her life. Over time, she found comfort in the new life she had built. Jack and his wife became close friends and welcomed her as part of their family. Amelia became the godmother of the couple's newborn son, a new relationship that brought joy and a new purpose to her life. Retirement was different from what Amelia had imagined when she was at the peak of her career. The tranquility of life out of the spotlight and away from business made her realize that simplicity and sincere companionship were far more rewarding than prestige and wealth. She enjoyed her days in a small country house, free from financial worries and the pressure of the business world. She spent time with Jack and his family, helped with the baby, and participated in the small celebrations and moments of joy that came her way. However, the peace Amelia had found was temporarily disturbed when she learned that her businesses had failed and that her children were in a situation of extreme hardship. The news left her with mixed feelings. Despite everything that had happened, maternal love still pulsed strongly in her heart. The Sadness over her children's situation made her reflect on the past and what could have been different. Amelia decided not to involve herself directly in her children's lives again. She wanted to preserve the new life she had built for herself, far from the mistakes and frustrations of the past. Instead, she chose to make anonymous donations to organizations that helped people in situations similar to what her children were facing, hoping that this could offer some relief to those in need. The following years were dedicated to living a peaceful and meaningful life, enjoying the company of new friends and family. The gratitude she felt for Jack and his wife helped keep the pain and sadness of the past at bay. Although she never returned to her previous life, Amelia found a new form of happiness and fulfillment. Thus, Amelia's story, marked by highs and lows, left a legacy of reflection on the importance of family, forgiveness, and the ability to find inner peace even in the most difficult situations. Her journey showed that, even after great adversity, it is possible to start over and find happiness in the simple things in life. Amelia left the cemetery with a divided heart. Despite all the suffering and betrayal, a mother's love still remained strong and unshakable within her. She had carefully planned every detail, together with the lawyer and Jack, to ensure that her children received a second chance, but in a way that would force them to face the consequences of their actions. With her final decision, Amelia left half of her fortune to charitable institutions, a gesture that reflected her desire to continue helping those in need, even after her departure. The other half was left to Richard and Emily, but under strict conditions. They would need to move to the country where Amelia had found and adopted them. They would receive only a minimum monthly wage, enough to cover basic needs, until the money ran out. This decision was Amelia's way of giving them a chance to rebuild their lives, but with the certainty that they would have to work hard to achieve something meaningful on their own. Over the years, Amelia stayed in touch with Jack and his family, finding comfort and joy in the new life she had built. Her peaceful existence, filled with new meanings, was a testament to her strength and ability to overcome. Although the challenges and pain did not completely disappear, the friendship and affection from Jack and his wife helped soften the impact of past difficulties. She continued to make anonymous donations to organizations that supported children and people in difficult situations, in an effort to ensure that others could receive the help her children might have benefited from had they taken a different path. Amelia hoped that, one day, Richard and Emily would find their way to responsibility and integrity, become better people, and perhaps seek her out for reconciliation. As the years passed, Amelia held on to the hope that, despite her children's mistakes and wrong choices, they might find new purpose and direction in their lives. She prayed that one day, when they were ready, she could see them again and see how they had changed. Amelia believed that everyone deserved a second chance and that, even in the most difficult situations, there was room for growth and redemption. With this sense of hope and the certainty that she had done the best she could, Amelia continued her life with gratitude and peace, surrounded by those who truly loved and appreciated her. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, and share. Thank you for watching.